Hey everybody, Kevin George here for another episode of Pettit Presents. And I am sitting here in our Pettit TV studio with resident Christon Hurst. Welcome, Christon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kevin.
And we are here to talk about Christon's new book, or I guess it's been on the bookshelves for a few months now.
A little over a year.
A little over a year. Okay, so a little longer than I realized. But we got his book right here, Project Sasquatch and a History of the Bonoban Era. This is a science fiction book, which is something new for you.
It is.
But before we get into all that, I want to ask you a couple questions, personal questions about yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grow up, where you from.
I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, was born there, was a young child in different places in Ohio, largely Dayton, and my family moved back to Cincinnati, Ohio, and then I went to the University of Cincinnati for an undergraduate degree in biology, and then I went to a place called Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas for a doctorate in virology and epidemiology, which is viral diseases of humans.
Okay, yeah.
And after that, I worked for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Cincinnati for 26 and a half years, studying viruses in water, some that are naturally there, others that are there as contamination from human society. And when they decided to retire me, I then changed and became a professional ballroom dancer and taught ballroom dance. And
did you say ballroom dancing?
Ballroom dancing.
Interesting. That's a big career shift right there.
It was, but the important thing is if you decide to make dancing a career, you need to figure out how you're going to pay the bills, because dancing seldom pays the bills. But I was left with a pension which paid the bills, and it meant I could finally afford to dance.
Sure.
Which was a whole lot of fun.
Huh.
And I've taught at universities in engineering and public health at universities, mostly in Colombia, South America, which is why the book also is in Spanish. It's actually my preferred language.
Oh, okay.
I'm more comfortable in Spanish than in English.
Huh.
But
did you write it initially in Spanish then?
I wrote it initially in English.
Okay.
And then I was missing the story. And so I again wrote it in Spanish. And after I had written it twice, I decided that was enough. I only could write in two languages, and that was going to be it.
Wow, yeah.
And I stumble on my words. I'm still a lifetime visiting professor of engineering at the University in Columbia.
Okay. How often do you get that?
I haven't been there in a long time.
Okay.
But they awarded me the position for life.
Wow, yeah.
And I knew when they gave me that it was likely to be the biggest honor I would receive in this career. And it has been. I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, you should be. It's great. So science sounds like it's always been a part of your life.
It was. I was born to be a scientist. When did it start affecting other people? Probably when I received a chemistry set. And I was restricted to perform the experiments outdoors rather than indoors. The experiments tended to be a little messy and sulfurous, and yes, it was the chemistry set that began it. And my father for a while was a chemist, and my mother for a while was a chemist. And so they probably wondered why I went into microbiology instead of chemistry. But it's the place to which life led me.
Sure. Well, tell me a little bit about your publishing history, because even though this is your first science fiction novel, you have had quite a few other books published.
22 microbiology books.
Okay.
And they are what I call viral ecology, the ecology of viruses. They also include books on the transmission of infectious disease, which none of that will surprise you knowing my educational history. And the rest of it is environmental microbiology, which was tremendously interesting for me. Yes, I did 22 microbiology books.
I couldn't even say like 22 biological terms. much less 22 books worth of stuff. Biology was a tough thing for me in school, so I'm always in awe of folks such as yourself.
There would have been things that were easy for you that I would have stumbled over or
Sure.
just been frightened and run away from. Biology, I understood because I thought about it, and chemistry or biology, I can look at a mouse and say, that's a mouse, and I understand biology then. I look at these drawings of what a molecule looks like, and I think, yeah, I know what a mouse looks like. I can understand biology.
Yeah, I guess you're right about that. Well, let's get into the book a little bit. Before we get into the meat of the book, I did enjoy, there's a short dedication at the front that I enjoyed because you did sort of talk about your history a little bit with when you were a kid,
Yeah.
experiencing biology through helping I believe your mom at a
My
clinic.
mother, yes.
And that there was a specific woman there that sort of got you interested in reading science, or kind of helped with your interest
She helped me.
reading science fiction.
Virginia Bomer. She was an immunology technician who worked sometimes in the office with my mother. More often, Virginia worked in a laboratory. And she was very encouraging to me. One day, when I would make a weekly trip to Cincinnati to wash microscope slides, Virginia Bomer was in the office that day, and she asked, I guess, what was new in my life, and I showed her a copy of a Tom Swift book that I had just bought.
And I'm not familiar with these series of books. So it's Tom Swift Jr.? Is that
Tom
what it
Swift
is?
Jr. And after that, every time that she and I were in the office on the same day, she would ask me if Shillitoe's had a new volume in that series on their table. Because every week I would get off the bus and go to Shillitoe's and look for those before I went to my mother's office. And when I said yes, Virginia Bomer, gave me the money to go and buy the book, which was very kind.
Yeah.
And she was a good friend of my mother. And eventually, as I became a university student and a graduate student, she often asked my mother how my science was progressing. It was tremendously kind of her to do that. And for that reason, I was happily in dedicating this book to her.
Yeah.
Why did I wait to publish the microbiology books first? I bought 22 volumes of the Tom Swift Jr. series. And of course, then I decided it would be fun to have 22 books of real science with my name on the cover.
You know, I hadn't put that together, but yeah, those numbers match.
Yes, and so after I had finished getting 22 books of real science with my name on the cover, I was brave enough to finish writing the science fiction book. I had begun the science fiction book in 2008 while I was still doing microbiology books, but I was concerned that publishing a microbiology book would result in a lot of science credentials just evaporating into thin air, like water on a damn sidewalk blows away in the mist. I have a feeling that's what happened to my science career, and so I waited till I was done publishing science books.
So did you already have the idea for this book kicking around in your brain?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
and I every once in a while I came up with an idea and I'd open up the file on the computer and insert that and then close it up again and say, no, I have to finish the microbiology books first because this will ruin the career of a microbiologist.
Huh. Interesting. Do you consider this? So this is very much a science fiction novel.
Yes.
I would emphasize the science because of
Yeah.
your science background. It very much comes through in this book. A lot of science in this book. Would you consider this a hard science fiction novel?
It is hard science fiction, and it's been described as very hard science fiction. The alternative is something called soft science fiction, which is fantasy.
Sure.
And I've spent so many years writing science, and I thought that the people who know me from my science books, the people who contributed to those books, there were more than 750 people who contributed to my microbiology books. Wow. I needed to publish something that would not embarrass them when they saw it on the internet and think, I contributed to several books edited by this person. I don't want to be embarrassed by seeing what's in this book.
I mean, as long as you're putting it out there as science fiction, I think people should understand. You would think, but in case folks don't know, hard science fiction typically is fiction based in reality, or at least science, forward-thinking science that is grounded in sort of the reality that we know today, if that makes sense. So, like I was telling Christon before we got started that this book reminded me a lot of the Mars series of Kim Stanley Robinson books. I think there's a series of 3 of them. It's like Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars, but it's all about a future society living on Mars, and it's hard science. It's based in fact, with science we have today. And this book reminded me a lot of that as I read it. You have a very unique writing style in this book. Sort of what I guess you would call third-person omniscient.
It's a historian.
Yeah, it's from a very historical sort of sense, as opposed to a today, what's happening in the moment. Can you describe that writing style a little bit? Was that intentional?
That was intentional, and that's why it's called a history. My perspective when I wrote it is that the author was not human. The author was not anywhere near this planetary system. The author is existing long in the future and explaining to their students about civilizations that have existed at other places in the universe, and saying essentially to their students, I want you to consider these cultures, and we're going to look at what they did well and what they did badly. And we can use this assessment as a means for our own civilization to move forward.
Interesting. Okay. I hadn't thought about the narrator aspect of this as I was reading it, because it is so
historical. It's written
and so third person, kind of overarching, kind of an overview written style. It's hard for me to describe because
it is a detached third person.
Yes, detached third person. It made me think of another book that I've read, E.L. Doctorow's Ragtime.
Yes.
I don't know if you've read that book, but takes place sort of in the late 1800s. And another book sort of written in that perspective. Your book has no dialogue, or very limited dialogue.
Very limited dialogue.
And his book is very similar in that way. So it was another sort of comparison that I had when I was reading it. So give us the kind of overall, we've kind of danced around it a little bit. It is a history. Can you give us kind of a couple sentence explanation of what is this book and what it's about?
Sure. This book, the first part of it is me holding up a mirror to society. And it is an examination of social philosophy, which includes the ethics with which we treat other people. And you'll notice there the treatments of the bonobans actually are treatments which have been done by other people, treatments of other groups in our recent history. I looked back about 150 years in our history, and that was the basis for the book. The interesting thing for me then is that, having presented this as a lesson in social philosophy, a lesson of ethics, I then take that and change it into a future. I have life on this planet hopefully learning from its mistakes. It does eventually correct the societal mistakes. The cruelty is eventually corrected. And then I look forward to the future. And I would hope that I successfully took you to the moon. I probably successfully took you to life on Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And the questions then, after having gotten over the question of social ethics, becomes a question of scientists needing to ask themselves the wisdom of their planned experiments. Scientists, and particularly I have a lot of genetic engineering in here, asks or should ask 2 questions. The first is one of intelligence. Do I know how to do this? And out of ego they say, oh yes, I know how to do this. But there's a second and far more important question, which is wisdom. Should I do this?
Should we do it? Yeah.
At the beginning, that question is not asked. Later, when we get into the moon and life on Mars, that clearly becomes asked. And hopefully that sets the stage, which will interest people. Do I believe this book represents the next 10,000 years? Actually, yes, I do. Yes, I do indeed. Go ahead.
Your vision of the future, the vision for humanity, as you just mentioned, there are stops at the moon, and then there are stops on Mars. And along the way, you have humanity not only bioengineering animals and that sort of life, but then also plant life and habitats on these planets. Where did you come up with some of these ideas of where you thought society was going? Are there other authors or futurists, for lack of a better word, that you look to for inspiration?
The genetics, if you'll remember, in the beginning of the book, I talk about humanity having changed the genetic landscapes on this planet. Mm-hmm. From a geneticist point, when you and I look at a landscape, we see trees, we see insects, we see birds, we see grass, we see other kinds of plants, we see fish. A geneticist will look at that and see packets of genetic information. That is the landscape perceived from the geneticist point of view. In the end, we go to Mars, we create the genetic landscape where there is none. So having learned lessons by destroying the genetic landscape on Earth, we use some sense of wisdom and create a sounder genetic landscape on Mars, and then know well enough to leave it alone. And partway into the book, I have humanity learning to just simply leave the ecology of this planet alone, having reached a point where we destroy it because we've simply got more people than the resources on the planet can provide. I have humanity learning and saying finally to the scientists and the genetic engineers, just sit on the sidelines and argue it out and leave the world alone, and maybe it'll have a chance to recover.
Yeah, it definitely comes through towards the end. Like in the beginning of the book, I feel like a lot of what starts this book and sort of starts where it goes is negative, or at least its consequences to decisions that are made. And then obviously at a certain point, we learn from that negativity and we progress it forward. Do you think that big advancements like that do come from either mistakes or from, what's the word I'm looking for?
Learning from mistakes, gaining some wisdom by learning from the mistakes. I hope so. Whether humanity really will learn from its mistakes, I don't know, but I hope so.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm asking my question very well. So, without giving anything too much away, this book sort of starts with a little bit of World War II.
Yes.
And a little bit of Cold War Russia.
Yes.
And then we get into, at least in the West, we get into 9/11, sort of, is kind of the start of these experiments that sort of start your story. I think most people would agree that there's a lot of negativity around those things. Those are not happy moments in history.
Yes, and I present the negativity as a serious criticism.
Sure. But do you think that to get where your future society goes, these things all come from a negative perspective at first?
Is it necessary? Is it necessary to make those steps and to learn from those lessons? Perhaps so, because we don't seem to be learning from our lessons otherwise. I think that learning from the lessons requires stopping and paying attention and seeing that these are mistakes that we've made, rather than simply reacting from one step to the next, one event to the next. We need to philosophically look at what we have done and make an assessment and then move forward to that. The
Bonobans in the book are experimented upon.
Yeah.
And there's some genetic engineering going on.
Yeah.
And I do think it's a very interesting, the perspective of the bonobans in this story is really interesting because they are sort of outcasts
Yeah.
at the beginning. And then by the end of the book, they're so entrenched in humanity that there's really no difference between them and general human, your natural humans or your purebred humans, for lack of a better phrase. Was that meant more as a comment on genetic engineering and the long-term effects of it, or more as a societal a sort of statement on society and how we treat others?
A statement on society, and at the very end, in the epilogue of the book, I present the philosophy of the original bonobans 10,000 years before, with an optimism that people reading the book will look at that and say, this is the philosophy that the bonobans had 10,000 years earlier in the story. Finally, the rest of society has gained an understanding and accepted that as their own philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting by the end of the book that you sort of lose track of the bonobans as you're reading it.
You do, and
Yeah.
it's intentional.
Yeah.
They become a part of society.
They just begin to blend in such a way that there's no difference between them and you and me.
And is it that the bonobans have changed, or society has changed to reflect the perspective that the bonobans had? Because I have the bonobans at the beginning of the story being very philosophical about society, and at the end I present that philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
I had fun holding up the mirror to society. Whether the world is ready for it or not, I don't know, but I had a lot of fun writing the book and writing the story.
Yeah, there's a lot of technological advances and terms throughout this book, and I'm curious, did you get much help coming up with some of these ideas? So in particular, when you're talking about creating environments.
None. No, that's all my thoughts. That's all my words. And if you wonder how those thoughts could come to be, actually it was pretty easy. I just sat down one thought after another, and then it was necessary to take the thoughts and put them into order, because the book presents a 10,000-year timeline and the chapters are organized in that way.
Yeah, about 500-year jump in between chapters.
Sometimes.
So it seemed.
At the very end, yeah. At the very end is a 2,000-year jump.
Right.
Because I had difficulty anticipating that far into the future the extent or frequency with which changes would occur. And for that reason, at the beginning of the book, where I could anticipate better, we're into time periods of 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. At the far end, I think we'll make those changes, but I don't know when they'll occur. My estimation of the timeline is less well-focused. And for that reason, the time intervals, increase to the end. And the final time interval is 2,000 years.
Okay, yeah. I was going to say, I felt like it was on average about 500 years, but it kind of differs throughout the book. Do you have a favorite section of the book? Because, as we said, it's a 10,000-year history. Much of it takes place on Earth, but then much of it takes place on the moon, which I think you refer to as Luna. Yeah. And then Mars as well. Was there a favorite section for you to write? A favorite part of our future history that kind of got you the most excited? And
the most interesting parts to me, and it will seem minor, was when I set a calendar for Mars. Mars needed a calendar, and one afternoon I had a tremendous fun looking at the rotational period of Mars and the inclination of Mars, which tells you the extremity of its seasons from winter to summer, and setting it up by how many months I wanted in a Martian year, how many weeks there should be in a Martian year. That afternoon was particularly fun when I came up with a calendar for Mars, because I'm not aware of anyone else having come up with a calendar for Mars.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to think. Nothing's coming to me off the top of my head.
But now that I mentioned this to you, you'll say, well, yeah, of course Mars has a calendar, but it's not been there before.
Yeah, I mean, you have different lengths of days, so then by extension, you're going to have different lengths of weeks and months, and
Yes,
yeah.
and seasons will change.
Sure, yeah.
Mars will have the seasons about twice as long as Earth's seasons. And if you like a long spring, well, that's great. If you like a cold winter, that's great. If cold winters frighten you, well, remember that spring and summer and fall will be twice as long as you anticipated on Earth. In terms of organizing the information, probably the best thing I did was understanding that in each chapter, I needed to present things in order. And so if you think back through it, if there's something happening on Earth, that's the beginning of the chapter. And then things which happened on Luna are presented after Earth. And at the end of the chapter, if there are things which occurred on Mars, it's that order. Because I realized that if I scrambled on a time period everything between Earth and Luna and Mars, the reader could never figure it out. And so I needed to go through in each chapter and sort out what happened on Earth, what happened on Luna, and what happened on Mars, and place them in a logical order.
Yeah, that makes sense. And now that you mentioned that, I do remember that from my reading, and it does kind of help keep things in order in your brain as you're, again, moving through this long period of time with these different places where radical changes are taking place.
What was your favorite part? What did you like the best?
I am a science fiction guy, so I really enjoyed when we got to Luna, and then when we get to Mars. I think I told you there's a section where they're mining, I think, asteroids and things to pull metals and materials
They
out
moon,
of.
titanium is the most profitable, and they moon that from
That section I found to be very fascinating. You describe sort of in detail the ships and the materials that are used to get, and then how they're getting there and how they're getting back, and propulsion systems and how they're able to make this work. And I found that fascinating, very fascinating.
Good.
Because again, this is hard science fiction. It's all based in what we kind of technologies we currently have, or technologies we sort of see moving forward. And so it's not a huge leap when you're reading that to think where we get from today to, yeah, that's a possibility here in a couple hundred years or whatever that is.
I'm glad that I successfully took you through this story. I took you onto solar sailing ships, and I successfully took you to the colonies on Luna, and took you through the different periods of settlement on Mars. I'm glad that I was successfully able to bring you through those.
Well, then at the end of the book, there's, and I hope I'm not getting too far ahead of myself, and I'm trying to think of how to talk about this without giving too much away, but there's a probe at the end of the book that is sent out, and then at a certain point the probe returns, and there's an inference, at least at the end there, that, at least this is what I think you're saying, that you're sort of suggesting humanity did not start on Earth. Is that correct? Did I pick up on that correctly?
That's my suggestion.
Or at least that life itself.
That life itself did not start on Earth.
And you do give a suggestion on where you think it started, at least in the book.
Venus.
Yes. So is there currently science behind that, or are there people currently suggesting that, or is this something that you've come up with on your own? I'm just curious.
It is something that I came up on my own.
Okay.
And the reason I did that was to consider the conditions on the different planets in our solar system. Venus at one time would have been far cooler, but the sun got warmer and warmer, and that would have destroyed any water that was on Venus, would have evaporated. The rocks on Venus show a prolonged period of time where the sun got hotter and hotter, and it changed the geology on the planet. And then I had fun. I considered if life came, if there was a life that looked for other existences in the universe, What would it make of seeing life on Venus that was clearly going to be destroyed? Should we give this life a chance? What should we do with it? Well, let's leave it here on this solar system, this planetary system. But we're going to have to put it on a different planet. Mercury was far too close and too small and never had an atmosphere. Mars is too small and it's going to lose its atmosphere. Mm-hmm. But maybe if we transfer this life to Earth, it will have a chance. And we can go back every billion years or so and see if we did something well by moving this life from Venus, where it would have been destroyed, to Earth. And we can look and see what this life is going to do to its new planet. And there is the book. What is the life that we move from Venus to save it to Earth? What is it going to do to the planet Earth?
Well, and then there's a parallel there to what we as humans do with the bonobans then.
There is.
Yeah.
There is. I had tremendous fun writing the book. I'm glad that you enjoyed reading
Mm-hmm.
it.
What do you hope readers get out of this book?
The first thing I hope that they get out of it is to understand that it's a unique book. I've not copied off of anybody else's book. Mm-hmm. And the second one is for people to understand ethics, the way in which we treat other species. And I created the bonobans, but the bonobans are an example just to look at what we've done to humans. The bonobans are just an example, and I'll present it to the readers and say, this is how humanity treated a half-ape. Created a half-ape, wasn't happy with itself, created a half-ape. This is the cruelty with which they were treated. But in fact, as you read the book, you will recognize that that is an example of the way in which humans have treated other humans, the way in which we still treat other humans. We have difficulty accepting those who have a different genetic heritage from our own, or a different religious heritage from our own, or different hair color, or different eye color. Somehow we feel a need to negatively discriminate against those people, as if we feel a need to sense that we are superior to someone or something else. The bonobans are a mirror held up in that regard to society. And I hope that the people who read this will say, yeah, that's how we have unfortunately treated humans.
Where if folks watching at home would like to track the book down or get themselves a copy of it, how would they go about doing that?
The book is sold by a company called Dorrance. It's available on Amazon. All the online booksellers in the world carry this. So it can be found on Barnes & Noble. Books A Million carries it as well.
Anywhere you get your finer books?
Anywhere you get your finer books, you will find this.
Are you working on anything else?
I am working on a book, but it's going to be a very different book.
Okay.
And the title of the book, if I write it, will be, get ready, Kevin. The 11th plague was chewing gum.
That's right. You did mention this to me. The 11th plague was chewing gum. That's a wonderful title, if you ask me.
Okay.
I don't even know where you're going with it, but it's a wonderful title.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin, for the chance to talk to you about the book, and I appreciate your having read it and enjoyed the book.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you loaning it to me and letting me check it out. I found it I found it unlike any book I've ever read before, and I do mean that in a good way. I mean, there are certainly parallels to other science fiction novels that I've read. There are parallels to other books that I've read, as I mentioned throughout this interview. But it really is a wholly unique book in that writing style that you've chosen, that kind of third-person omniscient writing style. I'm not sure I've come across anything like this before. So it was an enjoy. It was I don't want to say difficult. It was different at first, and it took me a little while to get used to the writing style of it. But once I did, I was into it.
It is a detached third person. It is
Yeah.
a history,
Right.
written by a historian.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to say textbook, but it's a historical sort of writing style, which is a little bit more sort of textbook. Again, science comes through.
Yes, absolutely,
It's very much
it
a
does.
science person that has written this book.
Absolutely, it
so,
does.
Yeah. Well, great. I greatly appreciate you letting me check it out. And quickly, before we wrap up, do you have any favorite authors or favorite books that you'd like to tell people about?
My inspiration for this book, and it was a very different book, would be Isaac Asimov's book, Foundation's Edge, which was part of the Foundations series.
Yeah, when you first talked to me about your book, my first thought when you talked about it being a historical, narrative telling, but from a historical mindset, I thought the Foundation series. Now, I don't feel like this compares to Foundation
No.
necessarily, but I can see the connection you're talking about.
And my interest in that was that Isaac Asimov was a professor at a university. Clearly, he was clearly a very good scientist, and also an author of science fiction. And for me, that was an inspiration. In the book Foundation's Edge, there is a lot of political history, because the Foundation series is a rewriting of the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't anything that I noticed in reading Foundation's Edge. I noticed the science. And it intrigued me that a science fiction book was presented with real science as a foundation of it. And yes, so Foundation's Edge is my inspiration. I have to hope that if Isaac Asimov, somewhere in this universe, his energy can find this book, perhaps he'd smile and say, "Christon, I like what you've done."
Well, I think that's a beautiful note to go out on. So everybody, again, the book is Project Sasquatch and a History of the Bonoban Era. And as we said, you can get it at anywhere that you get your finer books, your Amazon, your Barnes & Noble, all those kinds of places. And we'll put it up here on the screen for you to check out. And Christon, I appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thank
This was a lot of fun, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Thank you.